Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for coming. Welcome to the AA for our event tonight. This is the second event in this term's lecture series, Self-Organized New Models for Learning, called Collaborative Models, where we will be discussing how to incorporate collaboration into architectural education. We're thrilled to have an incredible lineup of guest speakers today. My name is Shavri. This is Leela and Abby. We are diploma students here at the AA. We have co-organized this series with Francesco Zudas, Francesca Romana Delaglio, and Rory Sherlock, supported by Manajay Verghese and Harriet Jennings. This event series explores the multifaceted relations between education within and beyond institutions that take the form of self-organized collaborative models that are made up of a vast, chaotic, and contradictory group that we call learners.
So this event is called Collaborative Models, and it aims to delve into methodologies for collaboration, particularly how they're translated into architectural education. The event will begin with each panelist briefly introducing their collaborative models and methods for a specific project. And this will be followed by an informal workshop with breakout discussions where current students and whoever else is here are encouraged to share their current work and practices and discuss potential collaborative trajectories for these. And you're welcome to refer to the prompts that we've printed out at the tables to just start the conversation. Also, we're organizing a series of lunchtime peer reviews. We had our first one today. That are encouraging individual students to share their current work outside of the unit system. And we have 2 more coming up in February. And also on February 17th, we will be designing and building a community garden for the AA. And we hope that you'll join us for the day in the workshop.
And I have the pleasure of introducing these speakers who do so many different things. So I'll keep it concise with this introduction. We have today Madeleine Griffiths, who graduated from the AA last year and is currently working as an assistant researcher at Forensic Architecture. Her practice is informed by narrative-driven queer methodologies. We also have with us Lina Ashour, who's a PhD student in gender studies at SOAS and a tutor at the AA, where she led a course on queer decolonial feminist theory. We also have Rachael Milliner, who graduated from the AA last year using queer and feminist methodologies in their artistic and film-based practice. They are active in Right to Roam London and is involved in spatial justice, organizing through the House of Aneta. We also have Sahra Hersi. Hersi, who's an artistic and spatial designer and currently a lecturer in design at Goldsmiths. She describes her work as caring about people, places, art, and architecture in that order, seeking to combine architectural methodologies and artistic narrative as common ground within her practice. We're also joined by Arinjoy Sen, who recently graduated from the MArch architecture program at the Bartlett School at UCL. His drawing plays a crucial role in Arinjoy's work, where it becomes an apparatus and alternative space for exploration within architectural discourse. His latest work was exhibited at the 18th Venice Biennale. We also have Jumanah Bawazir, who is a researcher at Forensic Architecture, exploring narratives and the spatial politics of exile within the Palestinian diaspora, as well as a multidisciplinary designer in her own practice. She graduated from the AA in 2021. And finally, we're joined by Thomas Aquilina, who is a research tutor at the RCA and co-director of New Architecture Writers, a program for emerging design writers of color. He also co-founded the publishing collective After Party. We're very excited to have all these guests who do so many different things and taking time out of their schedule to come here and talk to us. So with no further ado, I'll get to the next part. I don't know. Yeah, we started. Yeah. All right. We'll try to keep we do ask to keep the presentations short so we can begin discussions. I think all of these students are very excited to speak with you guys. So, yeah. Perfect.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maddie, and for me, the AA was a really great place to play with the intersection of queer, feminist, decolonial theories and architectural practice. I wanted to imagine a society that no longer commits violence against queer people, women, or people of color. I'll be showing some of the visuals from my fifth-year work, as well as some raw footage from the collaborative workshops that were a crucial part of the design process. So it'll be a mix of relatively polished renders, perhaps, and a lot of the messy behind-the-scenes work. So when I was still in the process of designing a brief for my fifth-year project, I wanted the proposal to be flexible enough to appreciate the clashing and at times contradictory and ambiguous value systems of a diverse queer community. I interviewed a lot of friends and a lot of my found family to understand our relationship more deeply to belonging, home, and our own queerness. Their lived experiences revealed a variety of thresholds that we must cross to access that feeling of belonging. Sometimes there were overlaps and sometimes not. Wanting to resolve these thresholds, my brief was, for a small moment, to try and design queer utopia, which is a bit of a mammoth task. But also, I didn't want to be that sort of authority architect figure. I really wanted to cast that image aside. And if I designed a queer utopia, it probably would have only been utopia for myself and not many other people. So I decided to shift my brief towards this idea of queering society and spatializing queer futurity, which is a concept that Munoz describes as a warm illumination of horizon imbued with potentiality. I knew that this vision would have to be collectively designed by and for the community that was seeking this belonging. So I came up with this little strategy that was for seeking queer futurity, and part of it was where I designed and facilitated 3 types of workshop. There was also the Non-Normative Worlds event last November, which is kind of part of this practice, slowly to develop my queer methodology, but the 3 workshops are what I'll be focusing on today. The first workshop really focused on design moves that might queer an object, infuse it with queer affects, and distilling that from the making workshops with my found family community, we identified 6 shifts that would be applied on multiple scales in both intangible and tangible ways. This would provide a queering toolkit to first dismantle and disrupt the norm. I first tested it on a series of objects, like the chair, before scaling it up to my flat, and beyond that, it became a more societal shift that I tried to imagine through these virtual spaces. By creating these virtual worlds that I could superimpose real footage over, I wanted to start blurring the line between our real experience and a speculative future. You can sort of see beginning here with this very strange, sort of queered flat, perhaps. The next workshop interrogated gendered expectations within domestic space, challenging the space we refer to as home, the site of queerness once rejected perhaps, but also one of belonging, as featured in several stories that were shared with me. More specifically, I looked at social relations around the dining table during a family meal. My workshop wanted to queer these relations, the space, and the act of cooking and dining together. So I came up with this sort of menu, I suppose, of different questions to ask at different stages of the meal, but also different ways we might play around the table, how we might change what the dining room itself is used for, and how to disrupt what kitchen, like the categorization of the kitchen and the dining room within the house. The speculative future I was visualizing in these half-real, half-imagined spaces often contained familiar elements that, when placed alongside a shift in those social relations, the counter-aesthetic, transforming it, or just using queer language, these served to enhance how these moments had transformed. In this case, the transformed queered moment was the family meal, which you kind of visualize here. The last workshop used role-playing to resolve conflicts that might arise in an intentional community, while allowing the participants themselves to co-design a queer commune of their own, from its governments, or anarchy at times, and spatial order or disorder, to what events might be annually celebrated as a community and how they were celebrated. This workshop really wanted to write new narratives of a queer future that is not yet here, but from being simply imagined, it becomes much more attainable. There's a few more visuals as well from that speculative future. So my initial aim for the overarching design project was to really capture the differing and at times contradicting values of this diverse community. The workshops were part of this investigative process while also celebrating the collective nature of inclusive design. But what I didn't anticipate was how with each workshop I designed and facilitated, I was creating a unique event that served as a platform for storytelling. By gathering for each workshop, we were constantly in a process of creation, creating space and time for our community to share. These moments in each workshop were always the most powerful to me, and I think they really drove the narrative of the work. They made me realize that while recording queer life stories that may have never been shared before could make members of the queer community feel seen, co-design and the act of collectively dreaming could also generate hope. Hope that our society will commit itself to healing, where we can look after one another as collective kin, regardless of identity. And I believe that once we're hopeful, we can act and work together towards that queer horizon. Thank you very much.
Okay, hi. I don't have slides. And I want to talk to you about the very practical, unsexy side of collaboration, which I think a lot of people don't talk about, and why we end up sometimes falling apart in our collaborative projects. But the whole reason I'm at the AA is because of a collaboration. Because, like my bio mentioned, I'm not an architect, I'm not a designer, but a friend of mine who we community organized together, George, hello, he was part of a unit at the AA where both him and the other tutor wanted to bring in elements of their own sort of like lived experiences and the politics they were experiencing outside of architecture into their architectural teaching. And so they were designing this unit that they felt could benefit from a theoretical background that they didn't have, which, you know, then sort of prompted a conversation with me of like, would you be willing to come and maybe give some background into this? So the first step for that to happen is, first of all, an interpersonal. I think we have this idea of like connections and collaborations having to be like objective and as a result of networking, and like anytime you bring in somebody who you already know, it almost feels like nepotism, but like realistically that's how shit works, okay? So it's fine as long as everybody involved is like competent enough to do that, and you also have to be really honest with yourself about that. The other thing that required for that to happen is for all of us to be really humble about our areas of expertise, in the sense that there were two architecture tutors admitting that they wanted to foray into something that they didn't know very well, and instead of writing it off, they decided to collaborate with a non-architect outside of the association to come and do this. I was obviously shitting myself for the exact same reason. I was like, how am I going to talk to architecture students at this, like, you know, institute that's, you know. And so, like, it could have very easily stopped there, where it's just like, I can't, like, nobody's going to take me seriously. Like, and they're like, no, it's going to be fine. And so it's not just an issue of somebody, like, welcoming you into a place where you would normally feel uncomfortable, but they really have to do that, like, emotional work is like, I promise you, you'll be fine. We've got your back. Whatever you need help with, we're going to do all of that. And so that sounds like a simple thing, but part of the way we sort of cultivate success in our respective fields is through this idealization of individual expertise. And I think that ends up being a collaboration killer, because the closer you get to that, the less you're likely to get into a situation and put yourself in a room or in a space where you are not the smartest person in the room. You're not the coolest or the most creative, and that's okay. But then the sum of the parts, basically, that when you bring all of these things together, it's going to create something completely different. And it also, you're releasing this sort of like attachment to a particular outcome, because you're exclusively dealing in unknowns. If you're going into a collaboration expecting that you can predict exactly how it's going to look at the end, then this isn't really a collaboration, or you're a dictator in the project. And, you know, you should probably check yourself on that. The other things that I think really like can get in the way that we kind of take for granted, and I've seen this as well in like community organizing, is we don't take seriously the interpersonal and things like personality traits. And so things like group psychology, like, you know, mutual respect, etc. We assume that like if somebody has the same, whatever, design philosophy, they have the same politics as you, then there's this assumption that you're going to work well together. Absolutely not. So I've also seen this where it's either in like queer feminist spaces, decolonial, creative, etc. There's this aversion to certain useful things we can actually take out of the corporate world. So the corporate world provides these really annoying trainings about like, find out what your communication style is. How does your manager like to email? And I know it sounds bleh, but also like in a collaboration, if I know, that you like to receive emails that are like bullet points or really long, that's what I meant about like the unsexy part of it. And having those conversations can really save you a lot of time in the long run. And to like get through the bubbling resentments people have of like, what is your capacity attention-wise for the length of a meeting? How do you like to be communicated with? In what kind of ways do you want to show up physically, emotionally, or mentally? How are we going to like blur the lines between this is when we can talk about the project, this is when we can get personal, etc. So yeah, I think that's just like my big takeaway from all of this is to don't shy away from the interpersonal, don't shy away from like the very messy human side. Have the really boring Excel-based conversations about who needs what. And don't let a flashiness of a project or the terminology or approach that you're going to be using like prevent you from seeing the other issues that can come across along the way. But yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Rachel. Lina's either just primed you all really well or basically read my presentation to shit. So like, let's go. No, it's great. So yeah, I graduated from the AA last year. I was a founding member of Right to Roam London, which I did sort of about the AA in partnership with Kirsty here and some other folks. And then some other things I'm going to whistle through really quickly and then talk more about other work. So while I was studying in the unit that Lina was just discussing with George, my project explored the queer feminist methodology in the context of land justice within the UK, tracing the history of the feminine ideal and the English pastoral. The myth of Englishness was deconstructed through popular culture, literature, and music to reveal the people and stories that muddy these images. The witches, the whores, the commoners. A feminist methodology is used to propose how to reclaim access to land. Firstly, by breaking down the power dynamics attached to different ways of knowing. The presentation, the films, the sources challenge academic norms. Nothing can ever be subjective, and nothing can ever be truly objective. Everything is subjective. Secondly, by storytelling as method, I'm using it to challenge dominant narratives that simplify non-normative experiences. Thirdly, grassroots activism rooted in queer futurity and an abolitionist future. Dreaming of utopia is often useful, but the revolution is not a future act. It is how we treat one another now in our daily actions. Finally, but embedded throughout, by seeing pleasure as an act of liberation. Audre Lorde defines the erotic as the pleasure that comes from sharing deeply with another. What could be more potent? So I started last year going, I want to talk about these things and I don't know what to do. And I went on a walk with Shuri. Where are you? Give us a wave, babe. So we went for a walk in Hampstead Heath and I was like, I want to talk about all these things and I don't know what to do. And we went and we talked about her family and she told me about how they cook together and the inherited knowledges that come from that. And she shared with me the beautiful saris that her grandmother sewed by hand. And that kind of like really unblocked the entire year for me just by having conversations with someone that I cared about. And for me, that was like, okay, so this was the drawing that came out of the project in the end. But the important thing for me was the method, was the sharing, was the caring, was like, so everything that I did from that point onwards, it wasn't about the output, it was about the methodology. And that I learned in that moment, I now carry through to all of the work that I do afterwards. And I think for the students in the room, maybe the point I'm trying to say with this presentation is don't think about your final project, think about how you want to operate afterwards. How are you not replicating the oppressive structures that you're sitting there and saying that you want to dismantle with this design, with this performance, with this project? What does it mean to act in the way that you're saying you want the world to be? Because we're all world building every second. So this is some Right to Roam stuff we did. And now this has had an effect that has rippled outwards. So this bottom picture is a exhibition that opened yesterday by someone called Fran Koopman, who came along to one of our trespasses in the summer, and that's now rippled outwards, and that's the power of collaboration that is built on trust. And so then this is a video from an event at House of Annetta, which is really where the future collaboration, which I'm going to talk through, started. So we're now exploring something called Commons of Annetta, where we basically are looking at what could a rural sister project of House of Annetta look like, both in a 1 year, in a 3 year, in a 5 year, in a 10 year. And it's about learning outside of the institution. What does it mean to reorient who the expert is, through breaking down these hierarchies, through loving one another really deeply and understanding all of the complexities that Lina has just spoken about, and finding out what makes you annoyed at one another, and then pushing through and doing it anyway and building something that's really beautiful and special. So we've just been on an 11-day trip, which basically was like the big brother of social experiments, where we all fell like really deeply in love with each other and were like, oh my God, how are we ever going to share this with other people? In Fran's parents' car that was constantly packed like this. And we talked about, what is heartbreak? Do you still experience heartbreak as someone who practices polyamory? Is heartbreak when you make coffee for someone who you don't see anymore? But we also giggled and wrote folk songs and laughed like so much, but also cried. And I think what I'm doing is I'm showing you a holiday photo album. This is a mashed potato temperate rainforest that we made. That's 2 tiers that we poured gravy from one to another for our first host, which is stunning. Like, this is collaboration. Like you want to build a world, like you got to love the people that you're doing it with. Like, you can't just be like, oh, let's do this together. Like, you've got to spend the time and the intention to like build that community and have that base, and also fuck up and piss each other off and repair that and then move forward. I've just read swearing quite a lot. Anyway, so we toured temperate rainforest through this journey. So this is one of the first spaces that we went to. And this is a picture from Common Flora, who Jane, this incredible self-described hag, runs. And we were housed through the network of people that we know, through the grassroots activism that we do on the generosity of strangers. And we saw incredible living projects, and we saw family farms that are definitely nation states. But we critiqued all of these things, and I think for us, we learned so much. Like, it answered so many questions, but it also asked so many more. And this is a man called Gerald, who was one of the first GMO activists, and he runs a farm in Pembrokeshire, and he housed us, and we went to a ceilidh on the Celtic New Year and danced with obscene amounts of children for hours and hours, and that's collaboration. Like, you need to spend that time investing in your community and investing in your people so that you can create something incredible. So this is all of us just being silly. And then this is a macaroni cheese Cairn Street, which is, so anybody knows the Granby Workshop project, the broccoli that's on the top right of that bowl, that's the winter garden, because we were sleeping on the floor of the residents of Granby, because when Fran worked with Assemble, they worked on that project. So yeah, very generous. But so we toured through all of these different projects, and we spoke to all these different people, and we asked them about the way that they collaborate and the way that they work, and learn how to love each other. And this is an LGBT plus friendly toll booth in Liverpool that we just thought was really funny. But yeah, I guess I'm sitting here rambling about how much I love my friends, but I guess what I want to say is, like, in a sort of roundabout way to Lina, like, you have to invest in the people that you want to change the world with. And if we're going to dismantle these structures, we have to do it in a way that we're not replicating them. And I'm going to leave you with this. Is the sound on?
Come on, where's the message?
To go away. Don't say you can say the pain. Won't you stay another day?
This is our boy band, which we've called Red Flag, and we have a single coming out soon. Stay tuned.
So my name, Sahra Hersi, and so my practice spans between art and architecture and design and all kinds of things. I hate the word, but multidisciplinary somehow. And what I'm mainly interested in is people, places, art, and architecture in that order. And I'm going to show you today 2 projects. One is ongoing, and they were both these projects, and the other has been completed, I would say, last week, and they both started in 2021. And both of them actually are working with young people, but I just want to make it very clear that I don't only work with young people. I think as a Black artist and architect background person, sometimes we can be pigeonholed into only working with young people, but I think young people are important, but I also do other work, just to make that clear. So the first project I'm going to show you is Mumford Growing Community, and this is the ongoing project. And this project I was invited to get involved with by a community organisation on an estate in Hackney, which is called Mumford Growing Community. And they wanted to regenerate a community hall. So what we did is, there's Rose there on the side, and she runs the Mumford Growing Community with some local residents. And she asked me to come and run a summer school and think of ways of like regenerating this sort of rundown, but still in use community hall. You can kind of see a glimpse of it in the corner there with where the young people are. And this estate has been built in the 70s during so it was council flats, some of them now been, and homes and houses, but some of them now been privatised, but still very much in council ownership. And the community hall is owned by Hackney Council. So the idea was to think of ways of regenerating it to make it more useful for young people, because Rose was approached by some people, young people, I keep saying young people, but teenagers on the estate, and they're like, we want somewhere to go, basically. And at the moment, this hall is not really serving us, and it was just around lockdown time. So there was lots of questions around how the hall could be used. And then I came in and she invited me to get involved in the project because for 4 years previously I had run summer schools for young people, mainly focusing on working class, global majority background young people who were interested in architecture. So the idea is that we would have a summer school and an autumn school, and they will go through the design process, and this is how the brief will be developed to regenerate basically this hall and design a new hall. So kind of took them through the process of what it is to be an architect, or kind of made it up in a way, because there is no one way, in my opinion. So we asked them to think, firstly, they did a site investigation, and you can even see in the previous photo here where they were looking around in the local, sort of a small radius around the hall. And then they drew the hall, and then they came together and thought about what does community mean? What does co-design mean? But really try and interrogate what is co-design. I think a lot of us in the room are probably a bit skeptical about what co-design actually is. Because are we asking people to co-design with us who are not designers? So there was asking those kinds of questions, I think was quite important for the young people to start thinking about. And what is community? And as we know, community isn't one thing. I think it's been demonstrated quite clearly at this table how community can take on many different forms. So it's also asking them about that. And also getting to really think about the power design has and how much it influences their lives. So that somebody designed this hall, then we did the school, I should have said, on site in the dilapidated hall. So they were on site, they were there, they saw how it was. We thought about how did it become run down? What did the council do? Blah, blah, blah. Loads of questions came up. And then they also were thinking about making, and we linked them up with Ceramics, who is a ceramicist who is based in Hackney. So we tried to keep the school very local. And they came and they made tiles, and they thought about how that could be integrated into the design. We also briefed them on how to do community engagement. So we had a community lunch, and the food has come up, I think, as a way of bringing community together. So it's about how do we get local people to come, brief the young people around what community engagement means, how you ask questions. And mainly, I think a lot of things, Lina said, came into play. How do you ask questions respectfully? How do you make sure that when people come in, they feel welcome? What do you provide? What's the give and take? How do you create a space where people feel they can share? And food came up, so we cooked a meal and people came and they talked to the young people, and I was there as well, observing, basically. And then after that, we thought about how can you start to design the space? So they made one-to-one interventions using construction tape. And then, they started to design the building, and they made models 1:50 scale. And that was also part of that give and take. What do we give back? We teach them about scale and model making and drawing. So constantly thinking about what are the young people getting out of it, because if you want to engage people, it's not just about come and we'll engage you and extract, but actually what are you giving back? And I think that's really important to think about, especially if you work with people or communities, like what can you give back? And also we gave them £25 a day. We only told them at the end of the day. So whoever stayed at the end of the day got £25. So the first day, and then after that, they all came back, obviously, the ones who stayed. We lost 2. It was a school for 10 people. We had 8 by the end. So we had a good retainment. And also we wanted to keep it dynamic, get loads of different people come in, and also shout out to Resolve and Melissa who came and spoke to them. We wanted to show them other practitioners who work in the built environment and who are from diverse backgrounds and doing amazing work. And that's that for that project. And this is another project called Ilford Forever, and I'm from Ilford in East London. And this project means a lot to me because I'm from Ilford in East London. And I worked again with young people, and the idea, this was during 2021 lockdown in like January, February. So I was asked to engage some young people from their arts group, Redbridge Arts Group, because Redbridge is the borough Ilford's in. And so we started to think about, and the brief was basically that they had got engineers to do the public realm, not designers. So they had an etching on the floor. The engineers drew up like an etching of the Ilford skyline on the floor in Ilford Town Square. And the council saw it and they're like, we're not sure about this. Maybe you should get an artist involved. And at the time, I had a billboard outside Space Studio, which just moved to Ilford. And because I was maybe the only artist they knew about at that time, they invited me to do the billboard. And then someone from the council saw it and they're like, we know an artist. So they emailed me and I was like, oh, okay. But I'm like, are you sure you want to make an etching? Because nobody's going to be able to see the etching. And an etching in granite, it won't be great. And they're like, oh, okay, can you just engage some young people? I'm being unfair. They were much nicer than that. So if they're watching this, I apologize. Please continue to hire me. And then, we spoke to the young people. We started to think about, okay, but how do you look at the public realm? How do you create a space where they can meet? How do you, we started to also think about domesticity. I showed them different artists that they might be interested in. It was limited what we could do because we only had Zoom, basically, to do this engagement over. And they only really had pencils because of safeguarding reasons or something. We couldn't send them materials. And there was as you know, with design projects, there's such a limited amount of time that... So I was like, okay, if they can use their pencils, maybe we can do something on a Jamboard in Google and I can show them some examples. And then they thought about affirmations, and then this idea of a civic rug or carpet came up and what that could mean. So then through the interactions I have with them, I started to think about what could this civic carpet mean and how can we go beyond and push what an etching is. So this is the design that I ended up doing, but working mainly with the granite that they already had, that they were doing this kind of crazy granite design that I'm not involved in around this. As you can see here, you can see a bit of it. So this is the finished piece. And only recently I managed to get drone shots of it for various reasons, but the project ended up being completed quite recently. So this is all made from granite and it's in the town square. So these are the 2 shots with the 2 granite pieces. And the idea is that it becomes a civic carpet. And young people, as I said, that's where they can meet and they can tell their friend, oh, meet me by Ilford Forever. That's it. Thank you.
So, hello. Yeah. Firstly, thank you, Shavri, Leela, and Abhi for having me. I'm quite excited to be here. I'm Arinjoy, and I work as an architectural assistant. But I also explore my interests in research through an art-based practice centered around contested landscape, citizenship, identity, narrative, spatial justice, and I draw a lot, which is quite kind of crucial in the way I explore things and tell stories. Today I'm going to talk about my project, Bengali Song, and it's going to be a slightly different type of a collaboration, kind of like a long-distance collaboration in a way. But essentially, it was commissioned originally by a Bangladeshi architect called Marina Tabassum, and later on, it was revamped where the actual collaboration came into play for Leslie Loco's Guests from the Future at last year's Venice Biennale. And I'm gonna try and talk about this project through 3 collaborative models that were invoked in its conceptualization and its production. So Bengali Song is a triptych of interwoven threads, drawings, and narratives that is rooted in Bengali folk traditions of storytelling. And it is centered around Marina Tabassum's Khudibari project, which is also, Khudibari means little house, because it's a very simple house for anywhere between 1 to 4. And it imagines planetary survival by prioritizing respect between diverse ecologies and peoples. So Khudibari as a collaborative model. And this is where the real inspiration came from, because when I first started chatting to Marina, and she was like really sweet, but it kind of, my master's project and what I was looking at was basically this. And so it was a good marriage, and I kind of understood what she was trying to do, but it was really inspirational. And so the architecture of Khudibari is a very resilient typology that was developed to, on the one hand, help people inhabiting the precarious, vulnerable coastal floodplains of Bangladesh who kind of regularly lose their livelihood and their houses due to floods and different environmental calamities. And on the other hand, provide a very economical, efficient, and easy to assemble and disassemble living space for the inhabitants of the Rohingya refugee camp in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. Now, Khudibari positions the architect as giving voice to marginalized people by working with them. So this was where I was getting ideas from how to actually kind of what kind of medium I should work with and stuff like that, because they worked very closely with the inhabitants of these marginalized areas and developed a typology that could possibly become and did become a tool for resilience. So they worked closely with them and learned from them to kind of develop a typology that uses local skill, local knowledge, local building materials, and local craft. And on the other hand, the locals, the local communities and the local people, they learned how to use this knowledge and use this typology as a tool for resilience. So, second collaborative model. So the reason I drew the tapestries or the triptych in the way that I did, and so this drawing style I developed is rooted in a traditional medium of Bengali folk scroll paintings called Pottochitra, that is largely based or practiced in marginalized areas in Bengal, like similar context to Khudibari. And historically, the purpose of these scroll paintings was to be a supplementary storytelling device for folk theatre performances, but also they were used as a very important tool for the dissemination of knowledge and awareness, like as you can see in the video, in the case of HIV awareness. Now, the production of each of these scroll paintings often involves an entire family where knowledge is passed on through generations. Like some members of the family prepare the paints, some do the borders, some do the fills, and some kind of write the song that goes along with it. So it's often a ritualistic process of singing, painting, and learning together as a family, which has also inspired the name Bengali Song. So it was only fitting to represent such a collaborative endeavor that Khudibari is in a medium which provides itself as another collaborative model. Now, finally, the production of Bengali Song, this is where I come into play. Like, this is where I actually kind of was able to learn from collaboration. And so inspired by the many hands that were involved in making the Khudibari project, I was also inspired to kind of work with marginalized Katha artisans, which is a very traditional form of hand embroidery, again, rooted in Bengal, so it kind of all kind of fits in together nicely. Now, the tapestries were made in collaboration with an NGO called She Katha, who represent marginalized women Katha artisans in Bengal. And like scroll paintings, the scroll paintings, Pottochitra, Katha is also a medium of storytelling. Now, I didn't really know that, because I grew up with Katha as a very domestic object, like blankets and stuff. So looking at that as a medium of storytelling and as a collaborative medium, because people work on it together, so like there's always a team of people working together, weaving together, also often while singing, which was really nice. And I happened to come across the NGO, which was beautiful to be able to collaborate with them. So, but when I started collaborating with the artisans, I couldn't really tell them what to do because one, I didn't know nearly as much about the medium as they did. Like they've been doing it for decades. And I was also really far away. I was based in London. So I spoke to them initially when I was back in India, but then I had to kind of communicate with them long distance. And more importantly, I wanted them to decide how to weave their own narrative, like what to highlight, what colors to use, see how they read and interpret the drawings. So instead, I tried to learn from them. The technical constraints of developing a tapestry, the patterns used, all of that. And for the artisans, it was a learning experience because they had never dealt with kind of a hybrid medium like this. So they always do the Katha stitches from scratch. And I kind of handed them over a printed fabric and they were like, we haven't done this before. So that's why I wanted to this was a big gamble because this was for Venice. I didn't have money to do another one or time. So it was like, you guys do what you want to do and we'll see what happens. And they turned this into that, which was incredible. And they decided what colors to use. They decided how they kind of interpreted the drawings themselves, which was for me, it was like an incredible moment of full circle because the people being represented in the tapestries and in the drawings became involved in kind of weaving their own narrative into the tapestries, which was just such a beautiful moment. But I'd like to end with this video, which is a part of the film I made for the spirit of collaboration. This was also a bit of a collaboration because all the footage a lot of the footage is from some architects and the NGO that they run called Face Bangladesh. And also I got so it was just everything somehow didn't start with the idea of collaboration, but ended up whatever I did for this project, in a way, collaborating with this is what we're not taught in uni. We all kind of work in isolation and it's I graduated over the pandemic and I went to a very particular university. We were not really kind of encouraged or we didn't have the opportunity to collaborate as such. So kind of coming across such an opportunity which kind of almost forced me into collaboration, it was such a beautiful experience. Now I'm okay, let's collaborate. And that's what I'm doing. I don't have anything to do, I don't have projects, but let's collaborate somehow. It's just fun working with people. You learn so much, it's amazing. Yeah. But thank you. This is, let the video finish, I guess. Thank you.
So I'm Jumanah. I called my presentation Notes on Methodologies of Collaboration, Subverting State Narratives. So states have asymmetrical access to information and means of investigation that they use to obscure or manufacture narratives in their favor. Their resources give an illusion of authority over truth that they use in their claims. With the help of mainstream media, they hinder the public's ability to make their own determinations and imposing a kind of monopoly on truth. So today I ask a question that I'm that I'm not really proposing an ultimate answer to at all, actually. I'm just hoping that it triggers within your projects some sort of thought. So I ask, what are the forms of collaboration? What are the tools and methodologies as architects and designers that we can use to subvert state narratives? So the subversion of state narratives fall within my interests. However, the methodologies and forms of collaboration could be universally applied. And I'll show you kind of different models and different ways to apply them. So I'll start by briefly talking about some of the work at Forensic Architecture. Then I'll run through my 5th year thesis project. And I'll end with how I applied some of the methodologies I developed there in a performance at the end. So how do you play? I want to talk about collaboration as an interscalar practice through this visualization. Essentially, what you see on the screen is very generic spheres resembling data points and a single cube in the center. The cube is either an object, a project, a thought, it's anything. The data points are at random distances and at random locations, and they could be viewed as either individuals, different practices, they could be cameras, all coming together to form the cube. So they are all in relevance to the cube, and all data points have a different perspective of the cube. Together, they generate its full 3-dimensional image. This is generic so that it could be applied to any scale as well as any practice. So I'll start by talking a bit about forensic architecture, very kind of briefly going through different scales of collaboration. On an institutional scale, we often collaborate with galleries as well as legal institutions, media organizations to communicate an investigation, depending on the commission, depending on the request, and depending on the case. Our work varies from police shootings to war crimes to environmental and racial violence. Our team and practice is multidisciplinary, and we're made of architects as well as software engineers, lawyers, artists, academics, journalists, and we frequently partner with experts in history, sciences, anthropology, activists, and many more. Yeah, the list goes on. So the data points are also different practices coming together for the cases, again, depending on the case and investigation. For example, on a practice scale, in the case of the second Beirut investigation on the port, not the welders, we collaborated with Kindling, which was a fire safety nonprofit based in the US that helped us make these kind of heat simulations, as well as smoke simulations. And we were also, for this project, in collaboration with Febrayer, which was it's a coalition of media organizations who we worked constantly and very closely with them throughout the whole investigation. And then they published it after. In the extrajudicial killing of a journalist, Shireen Abu Akleh, we collaborated with Al-Haq, Forensic Architecture Unit, which is located in Ramallah. It's a human rights organization, and it's very important to be working with people on the ground. And I can expand on this, why it's important as we're in discussions, as we're breaking out. Yeah, and this project, this case is on the 11th of May in 2022. Shireen Abu Akleh was killed by Israeli occupation forces. She and 5 other journalist colleagues were targeted by Israeli marksmen. So on the scale of the investigation, we often use open source images and videos to geolocate them on a 3D model. We end up with crowdsourced evidence, where we can tap into people's views and witnessing of the event. So reconstructed 3D environments are often the common base through which interdisciplinary experts analyze events of violence. So on the scale of the construction of the 3D model, collaboration occurs on the scale of the image and the pixel. Here you see multiple blue dots on this model. This is basically a drone that flew down the street and took multiple images, dozens of images of the street, different directions, to produce a photogrammetry model. And we use this technique because of its accuracy, as it's measurable to the millimeter. So the visualization I showed before of the cube and the circles is very similar to this. This is essentially how photogrammetry works, through a collaboration of multiple two-dimensional images taken from different directions of a single object or of a space. A three-dimensional object or a space is generated. So the way we use photogrammetry in forensic architecture is for the precision. But I'm going to move on and talk about how I used it in a completely different way in my 5th-year thesis project, where photogrammetry was used as a tool by which collaboration was possible. So not just by the cameras, but as sort of this micro crowdsourced thing. So I sent out a detailed document to members of the Palestinian diaspora that explains how to generate a photogrammetry model. This was essentially the collaborative element and the first step of the project. I won't talk about the project in detail. I'm just going to kind of whiz through why this was important as an element. The project delves into the direct and generational collective memories of the Palestinian diaspora, and it explores what a space for collective memory may look like. The space comprises of an organization and a materialization of the archive, being the scanned elements by the diaspora, seeking the possibilities of the right to return through directly connecting memories to different parts of Palestine as a form of land reclamation. So this was one of the scanned objects by one of the participants. This is a Palestinian embroidered tobe that once transformed has generated a new spatial landscape. You can actually see all the tiny data points that produce the object. But how the objects come together for a digital performance was the question. So allowing the production of the space to become possible, essentially these scanned objects transformed into being main characters of the story in the space. Here the story was titled Debka Ghosts. And finally, the same micro crowdsourcing of memories. Is there some? Through a tool, this is a different project, but used the same methodology. I used the same micro crowdsourcing of memories through the tool of photogrammetry for this performance, My Land, My Memory, held at the Sharjah Biennale in March 2023. I was invited to collaborate by artist Marwa Al-Moret alongside Kiori Kara, a choreographer who was working with the Sharjah Performance Academy. And the project had 3 components. The performers on either end of a screen. The screen, which was the digital visualization, that was my contribution, as well as the sound that included poetry by multiple poets from the diaspora. This piece also delves into the collective memories of displacement, to create a collective fictional space of untold individual narratives.
لوين؟ أنا ضايعة بين 2 أو 3 4.
Immersed in a fictive hyperreality of abstracted imagery, the performers encounter and interact with an alternative world that enables them to imagine an idealized version of their homeland.
لا جذور تبقى فنحن لسنا بشجر، ولا فروع تثمر فنحن لسنا بفاكهة. أنا نتاج الإنسان حولي، وأنا الإنسان، وللإنسان أنتمي.
تك تك توك توك، تك تك توك توك، تك تك توك توك، تك تك توك توك. Tick tock, loop dub, tock tick, loop dub, tick tock, loop dub, tock tick, loop dub. Another house demolished yesterday. That's another family exiled today. 1948 is every day. Make way because we are transmuting the tick of the clock, evolving. Our cut-off branches are rerouting. We're getting closer. Our times are running faster. But where's the justice in the struggle? Because another house leveled is another family unsettled, another higher frequency to the vibrations of our anger funneling through your walls, our roots wedging through, breaking through our enclaved minds. So here, collaboration is occurring on different scales again, in all parts of the performance, as well as the micro crowdsourcing of the digital production, as well as the series of poets within the soundscape. So I'll just end with this image again, where collaboration is an interscalar practice. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. It's quite hard to follow 6 presentations. I'm going to try. I've got 5 minutes. And I, in a way, I suppose, I thought about this sort of time constraint of 5 minutes to also think about this project and program, New Architecture Writers, which I co-direct with Tom Wilkinson. And we've had 5 cohorts. It also happens that the open call is now open, closed on 16th of February. But I want to talk about this project because I think it really is it's an attempt at collective thinking and collective practice. And it thinks about writing as a form of architectural practice. Lila was part of last year's cohort. Shumi Bose, who's in the room, is integral to the deeper thinking of the work. And as we heard with Arinjoy earlier around Leslie Loco said this last year about new architecture writers, the way to think about newness, that the emphasis on new in new architecture writers refers not to only those who are the writers, but what they see, what they say, how they say it, how it is received, and who will come after them. And for those who don't know, New Architecture Writers is a experimental pedagogical project that runs for 1 year, has been running since 2017. And the idea is that this extra institutional space provides 9 young people, or 9 emerging writers, the chance to think about how writing can be a component to their practice and their work. And I suppose what I'm interested in this conversation and hearing the others today is to think about a kind of institutional proximity and a kind of relationality to community. And I think it connects very much to the work that was spoken by Rachael about kind of storytelling as method, and also by kind of Lina and around kind of lived experience. And so we've had these 5 cohorts. There's been a number of events. We've had 44 alumni. And so when now the question is that if you were to write in or rather there is no work written by people of color, actually it's totally false, right? Because they're here and they're in the world. And our sort of champion is Sean Adams, who was 2022 in Thailand because of the program, yeah? So he says he was at this Standard Hotel, reviewing the hotel because of the program. And also an alumni of the AA, Abby Phillips, kind of speaks about it as a really a place that sort of questions the established norms. And I think the kind of the work of Jumanah is very much about that, kind of to think about memory in a very different way. So I suppose this is really an attempt to make the invisible visible. So the kind of statistics around this show that those who write about architecture is very much a kind of monoculture. And when we think about architecture, we want to think about how we might inhabit spaces, but also a lot of the time the way that we come to see a building is actually how we read it, or how we sort of engage with it, not necessarily through our physical presence. And so not only is it important that we diversify those who design buildings, but also those who write about them. And so I think this is an attempt to think about a move towards a progressive practice, to think about the kind of the landscape of architecture more broadly, and everybody involved in the making of the built environment. So here we are at the Cosmic House with the fourth cohort. And so I guess what I'm trying to talk about here is kind of an amplification of critical voices. And one of the ways that we try to amplify these voices is to think about them in conversation with each other. So the program itself is designed in a way that that as individual members, they also have a chance to think as a collective voice. And that's really important in the, I suppose, making of events and the delivering of them, to kind of put ourselves in public. I like to think about this as kind of an agile pedagogy. In other words, if we want to kind of move away from the kind of fixed norms, particularly of a university setting where things are so tightly bound and constrained, actually, how do we allow ourselves that every year we can kind of reshape or remake our pedagogy? And that means that I think we're also able to then respond to the city. So in a way, we're trying to think about how we can write about, but also produce a kind of urban mandate. And there's a sort of flexibility to that. But also what I add is to think about maybe, Arinjoy, your idea of kind of passing down generations. My hope is that now with 5 cohorts, there's a kind of generational, there's a kind of development through each generation. There's a kind of passing down, kind of as Madeleine spoke about, kind of new narratives being formed. And so really, New York Architecture Writers is a space that is, I think, in public, and in a way that perhaps at university, we do our work kind of very, very much kind of, it gets submitted on Moodle, it's closed, it's often unseen. I suppose in architecture school, it can be through maybe the end of year show, but we really want to kind of make public, make visible the actual pedagogy itself. And I suppose this is, to me, I suppose it kind of relates to the kind of the writing of someone like Sahra Ahmed, who in her book says, on being included, she writes, the familiarity of the institution is a way of inhabiting the familiar. So institutionalization comes up for practitioners partly in the description of their new labor, that diversity work is hard because it can involve doing within institutions what otherwise would not be done by them. So what I'm trying to say here is I want New York Architecture Writers to occupy an unfamiliar territory, to be willing to ask difficult questions and do those on stage and in public. And so what we see here across these 10 events that we've now hosted is an attempt each time to I suppose give the members a chance to think collaboratively. So the kind of bottom set, what's called NAW Live Winter, is where each of the cohorts have collectively thought about their own project. And this has often been an attempt to think about collective writing. So recently, I know there was the House of Annetta was mentioned earlier. You're thinking about a sister to read a comments of the Annetta. Well, we were there not too long ago with Exquisite Resurrections. And then the year before that was an attempt to think about a day-long broadcast about air rights and to think about who has access to air. And I suppose in a way, I was thinking earlier when Rachael, you're speaking about kind of whose story, who gets to tell that story. And that's very much what we're trying, I suppose, to do here. And the other themes that I've kind of explored, kind of home and homemaking, was really critical to the third cohort. And then when we put on a series of events around depends on your perspective, it was very much a question of how are we able to think about the critical voices of difference? Yeah, but how do we not only think about how we homogenize difference, but how do we animate difference? And that's really my hope for the program. And then just to kind of come back around, I was with my after party crew a couple of years ago here for another model series, which was called New Models that Manager had hosted. And we talked about a new model for criticism. But the after party actually was born out of this program. So although I'm speaking to you here as kind of co-director of the program, actually I was one of the inaugural members, and then kind of went on later to run it as I do now. But hopefully that gives you a sense of the program, and of, I suppose, these ideas around publicness, agility, criticality of voice, I guess kind of progressiveness of practice, but really all an attempt to thinking about where can you make visible the invisible. And that's the kind of question I suppose as Jumanah kind of offered you a sort of prompt, my kind of prompt would be, in your projects, anyone who's a student here, what are you trying to make visible that was previously invisible? And thanks so much. That's it.